Okay, welcome back everyone. Thank you for that. We had a very interesting set of breakouts, at least the one I was in was very interesting. I think we need a readout now from each of the breakout rooms, not led by us, led by whoever has been designated as workstream lead. So, James, I don't know which workstream you were shepherding, but who was workstream lead?
I was in the performance characterization workstream, and we didn't actually decide on a workstream lead as far as I know.
Okay, it falls to you then.
I'll do the readout. I'll do the readout of what was discussed in the workstream. I think we probably have to have a slightly more democratic process, but that can be taken care of at some near point in the future. I will do a readout of what we talked about. I'll share my screen. So first of all, we thought about what problems we're trying to solve. In summary, we want to understand how the various components of the system perform individually and collectively on hardware representative of the near-term upcoming deployments we know about. We want to try to find out what the system is sensitive to hardware-wise and how it might be sensitive to scheme architecture. And by that, I mean the number of DFSPs connected, and if one or more of those DFSPs are generating most of the load or varying percentages of the load amongst the scheme participants. That's what we want to know. Our strategy is to show that the system is capable of 1,000 transactions per second. Miller, being the man with his finger on the pulse of the upcoming deployments, gave us that number. The plan is to discover what the actual number is and to push the system to and beyond its current limits and learn from that process. We identified 3 priorities for the work stream. The top priority is to find out how fast the system is currently. There's a lot of considerations under that. First of all, if it doesn't meet the baseline target of 1,000 transactions per second sustained for 1 hour, with less than 1% of those transactions taking greater than 1 second to clear and complete, with no unexpected errors, durable for 1 hour, then we need to take immediate action to rectify that situation. We thought about how to define what a transaction should be. We suggested that it should be a full end-to-end test covering address lookup, quotation, and transfer. And we will give due consideration to a ramp up from low load to high load during the duration of the test. We acknowledge that nation-scale deployment is our target customer right now because of the adoption pipeline. We want to target our activities at understanding the characteristics of performance of the system for this type of deployment. And that means when we think about the scheme architecture we design, we want to think about what those nation-scale deployments are going to look like. We want to make sure that the test architecture and the tool chain that we end up with is reusable. We want to be able to repeat these tests ad hoc as and when we desire, and there are various points at which we think that will be appropriate. We want to run this test, firstly, top priority, in an environment where we can take the underlying platform considerations out of the equation. So if we were to run this in cloud, for example, we might be throttled on I/O, we might be throttled on disk. There's lots of things that are hidden from you. We think it's best to try and remove those from the equation, not only, but primarily because these upcoming deployments we know about that we're prioritizing are likely to be on bare metal. Also, if we run the tests on bare metal or some appropriate deployment like Kubernetes on Kairos, that's currently being floated as the way we should go, then we think testing on what we're actually thinking of recommending is the way to go. We want to look at using the same tool chain that was used previously in the community, which is basically using JMeter clusters. There were some issues before with using the SDK in front of the JMeter clusters. We might achieve the same end-to-endedness of the tests without the SDK. There's been some suggestions that we can use JMeter in some cleverer ways to handle the callbacks, to give us more certainty that the tests we're performing are representative of real-world transactions. We want the work stream to design an appropriate load, which really means a transaction scenario mix of positive and negative cases to test the edges of the system. We don't want to just do a happy path. We want to understand how the system will behave under load when some negative things, negative but not unexpected, might happen. So certain failure modes, e.g. when a DFSP runs out of liquidity or when they just stop responding to API requests. We want to factor in those type of scenarios. We want to push beyond the stable limits of the system to discover how it fails and to plan any remediating activities that might be needed. Underlying all of this is giving due thought and consideration to what metrics and points of observation we think will be useful to give us the best data set for later analysis. And that doesn't just mean application layer metrics, how many TPS we did. It's also looking at how the underlying hardware is performing in terms of CPU load, IO load, etc. And we want to give some thought as to how the data that we capture during these tests can be used to inform later calculations of cost per transfer or total cost of ownership for Moduloop platforms, and how various different hardware platform configurations might impact that. So considering running the full set of tests on different hardware configurations to understand what performance characteristics we get under each might help a potential adopter understand how much hardware they need to buy day one and how much they need to plan to buy in a year's time or 2 years' time based on their business modeling of how their transaction load might change over time. I'm going as fast as I can, please bear with me. Second priority for the work stream, to introduce performance tests at a lower level, possibly during CI builds, to run against components or smaller integrated parts of the system. So people that are committing code changes and people watching the system from slightly further distance than developers can understand how those changes are impacting the performance of those components. It's useful as a developer if you make a change to know that it's impacted the performance of the component by a factor of 10 or 100. That's hard for people to figure out right now unless you do your own local performance tests. We want to build that into our pipelines. However, it was pointed out that CI runners are often shared, and they might be running loads for other organizations even. So comparing one CI run to the next is not possible when you don't know how much of a CPU you might be allocated at any point in time. So we thought about maybe using some dedicated runners. With Circle CI, it's possible to run your jobs on some dedicated runners in your own infra that you use, we believe. So we're going to look at doing that possibly. I don't want to go into too much detail. I don't want to make any promises here, but given that the EKS switch from the core team looks to have saved some spend in AWS, we might have a little bit of budget to spend on 1 or 2 dedicated EC2 instances to do this. We want to generate those metrics, reports, and charts so all interested parties can see the impact of code changes on performance. That's the impact of doing this. We'll understand how our individual code changes are potentially impacting the performance of the subsystem and the system as a whole. Third priority for the work stream, to develop capacity to manually run these repeatable tests whenever we might desire so, in a way that is efficient, cost effective. That means spinning up potentially a full environment, a full test suite, running a bunch of tests, capturing the output, generating reports, and then destroying that infra. That might be expensive, but we want to figure out exactly how expensive, and at some point feed into the decision wherever that might be made about how viable that is from a community stroke business standpoint. Does anybody have any questions?
When's the next meeting of this work stream, and who's the work stream lead, and et cetera, et cetera?
That's a very good point. Like I say, we didn't discuss who's going to be the workstream lead, but I think on back channels today, we should decide when the first meeting is to decide that, and to firm up the plan for going forward based on the workstream framework that yourself and Simeon have been working on. Obviously, we'll reply to that. I will take the lead on convening that first meeting, though, if that's okay with everybody.
And putting it on the community portal.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay,
back over to you.
That was great, thank you. And now I'm going to go over to Sam. Unless Sam's group managed to appoint a workstream lead. Otherwise, Sam, it's over to you.
I think I agreed I would speak and report back, but I don't think we decided on a workstream lead yet. Thanks for sharing. Can everyone hear? Sorry, my background noise isn't great.
We hear you, Paul.
Yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, good. So what we did is we came up with a set of 5 important steps to help with the adoption. We actually took it a little bit further. We took it, we put in some of the gaps that we thought should be addressed, and maybe aren't currently addressed as well as we would like. So we added those in there as well, and put down the road. So the first thing that needs to happen. So to sort of meet the criteria for adoption, we really need to meet the first 2 goals that was put in place, and then the technical debt part of it on the roadmap, and then the last 2 sort of gaps that we feel like we would like covered, in addition to the requirements to meet adoption. So let me go through them quickly. Documentation of repositories. We actually do have documentation already on that, but not quite sure where to put it. But we obviously can work on that and make that available. So we need to decide where to put that documentation, and then sort of publish that. That can happen. Because we've already done most of the work there, that is something that we can easily move. Then next, and this is really important, we need to present a report to the product council, identifying gaps and explaining the current status of Payment Manager, where it is, and what needs to happen. So I've agreed to do the work for that and present it to the Payment Manager. So we are fairly confident that we're going to be able to meet that one, and that's a very, very important step as well. Then on the roadmap, technical debts. This is the current biggest hurdle, test coverage. Having said that, we have in fact made massive progress on this, and we intend to make even more progress on it. But whether we will get to the end of the road, I'm not 100% sure yet. So we can't. So it's on the to-do list. Not quite sure how far we're going to get, but that's there, and certainly would appreciate any sort of community effort if there is to try and get that over the line. Then developing a test harness for full security enabled. We do actually have some prototype test harnesses for our core connectors, and I think it would be good to extend that so that they're more general and can be applied to a whole lot of test harness sort of core connectors. The reason why this is important is most of the repositories in Payment Manager, in fact, are core connectors, understandably, because those are the different systems that connections have been, integrations into core banking systems have been built, or at least prototyped. So I don't know if all the test harnesses or all the core connectors need to be of the same quality level, because some of them are just POCs. But certainly we would expect sort of a standardized approach to testing those core connectors end-to-end. And so that's number 2A on the list there, the core connector. Then 2B is security features. Now, Payment Manager brings a couple of really nice things to the table. The two most obvious is the synchronous to asynchronous integration, which makes building integrations a lot simpler. And that we got in the SDK, and that's easy to test. But the other really important one is it adds this layer of security onto it, and it would be good to have a more independent way of testing those security features. At the moment, the only way to do that is currently in the infrastructure code. It would be better if that was independently tested. So it would be good to have a sort of a test harness to be able to test those. And coming along with that would be the MCM sort of distribution of keys and certificates, because they work in tandem with the Payment Manager and the automated onboarding. So it would be good to have some testing around that, and then obviously this P2P test transfer externally connected test set, which the Payment Manager could trigger to be able to test their own system from a payer and a payee perspective after they've connected into a live hub. Like I mentioned previously, we want the hub to be able to run it, but also the DFSP once they're connected. So building that, I think would be good. And then lastly on our list, we've got sort of more generic versions of deployments. So there's been a lot of work on IC and sort of refactoring that out. We need something similar for Payment Manager so that we can in fact deploy Payment Manager in more than just AWS, which is the current situation. Yep, and that's our shortlist. Any questions?
Okay, thank you, Paul. So you're the work stream lead, are you, Paul?
I don't have to be, but it's an important. Very happy to play that role if it's important for everyone that I do.
So I'll hand over to you the scheduling of the meetings and so on.
Okay.
And updating the community portal so that we all know when the meetings are. Sorry to go on at you, Paul. It's just we need these things.
I was going to say the first one needs to be at Product Council. So back to you, Paul Maitland.
Fine, that's fine. See you next Tuesday.
All I was going to say, 21 members voted for this work stream, and we had 3 members who joined, so it was a very productive discussion. we were able
A very
to
focused discussion.
focus and we were able to arrive at conclusions easily. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So there's one left, the foreign exchange work stream. And I was in that work stream discussion, but we did manage to elect a work stream lead. I say elect, appoint. Michael.
Thank you. I've been sitting transfixed with envy at the fantastic documentation that was produced in the other sessions. We didn't, I'm afraid, produce any documentation at all that did already exist. So much so that I've got an early Christmas present for the payment manager group. One of the things that we identified that we would need is the ability to, sorry, not the ability, but to make additions to payment manager, additions to cover the sorts of things that we think will be necessary to make it easy for participants to undertake currency conversion. And we started asking ourselves whether there was some easy to get at piece of documentation that would explain how to add new functionality to Payment Manager, because we didn't want to worry the Payment Manager people, and still less, I'm afraid, to become dependent on them in any way. So I'll be talking to Paul about that in the near future. We had the luxury, I think, of having things reasonably well defined in terms of what we want to do. Our plan is that by the end of this coming PI, we will have a proof of concept ready, working version of currency conversion for one of the routes. As you may recall, I said there were basically, you could either do bulk currency conversion or payment versus payment currency conversion. And with payment versus payment, you could either do it at the payee DFSP or at the payer DFSP. So we're going to pick one of those, which will be one of the PVP ones. And we will have that route running with some error cases as well as the golden path case, but not probably with all of the error cases working. So that's our objective. We spent quite a lot of the time working through the proposal with people who were interested in implementing it, which I think was a very productive discussion. I've taken away I've taken away the action to go and produce another sequence diagram based on our discussion. And we'll have another meeting real soon now.
Which you will, of course, publicise.
Widely.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Michael. And that's the end of the readouts from the three breakouts today. So I'd like to thank you all for your participation. It was a really interesting discussion in the FX work stream. I was, but I'm sure the others were as well. So thanks, everyone, and back to you, Simeon.
Right. Thank you all, folks. So I will quickly share my screen here to the final.